I think we're live. Now we'll alert people. Okay. Thank you
Hey,
all.
good,
Oh, sorry.
good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining the Center for the Study of Race, Politics, and Culture, or CSRPC, for our signature lunchtime program series, Research Bites. My name is Anaga Dalal, and I'm Assistant Director for Communications at the Center. Research Bites is our monthly speaker series and one of the many initiatives we have spearheaded over our almost 30 years of advancing scholarship, arts, and public dialogue about the centrality of race and racism in the systems we inhabit. Our goal for this series is to create an informal and interactive space where we all can learn firsthand about some of the exciting research happening on the University of Chicago campus. Please watch the chat for subscription links to the Hub, our weekly newsletter, and please follow us on social media. Our handle is at CSRPC. Before I introduce our speaker, I wanted to thank CSRPC Program Administrator Tiara Kilpatrick for bringing the series to life. And now, without further delay, I'm excited to introduce today's very special guest and CSRPC's newest faculty affiliate, Rebekah Israel Cross, who is an assistant professor in the Department of Public Health Sciences. Professor Cross currently leads a multi-phase project exploring the health impact of displacement on the south side of Chicago. Her work uses quantitative and qualitative methods to explore how structural inequality impacts health. Professor Cross's research involves conceptualizing and measuring racism, unpacking the relationships between racism, housing, and health, and highlighting how the field of public health perpetuates racism. Professor Cross earned a PhD in community health sciences from UCLA, along with a minor in urban planning. She holds a BA in sociology and political science from the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill and an MA in sociology from American University. Prior to UCLA, Professor Cross worked at the Black AIDS Institute, where she led the Training and Capacity Building Department, which trained Black public health workforce members on biomedical interventions to improve HIV continuum of care outcomes. So now, without further delay, please join me in extending a warm welcome to Professor Rebekah Israel Cross.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for that introduction. Let me just share my slides here. And then we can jump right in. So I don't have a very long presentation today because I wanted to have a lot of time for questions. So I'm just going to jump right in. The intro basically said everything that I was going to say on the first slide, so I'll just get started. So this is me back in the day. I don't remember how old I was in this picture, but I always think about how, if we did not live in a world that was so full of inequality and hardship and oppression, you would probably just find me somewhere on a boat in some water just like this, because that is sort of my happy place. So I just wanted to start there. But I think what I wanted to share with you all today was sort of my journey of how I came to Chicago and how I came to study the things that I study. And it really does start with me being a child and having a relatively good childhood. And we traveled a lot. So this is my sister and I. This is me in the pink. And my sister in the red. And we traveled a lot. This is us in Florida, and that is not a real alligator, so don't worry about that. We traveled a lot as kids. My grandparents lived in Florida, and we would spend our summers with them. This is actually a real snake. I was very adventurous as a little kid. And so we had relatively good, like, normal middle class kind of childhood. And then in 1998, when I was 9 years old, my father was arrested and incarcerated. And that really changed sort of the trajectory of my life, my sister's life, my family's life, it was very, very traumatic, as you can imagine, being a young child with a parent that's incarcerated. So this is the kind of the condo building that we grew up in. And I have so many memories from this building. But after my father was incarcerated, we were promptly evicted from our home. And we spent a lot of time bouncing around, from staying with friends and staying with family members and sleeping on lots of couches. And I have even memories of us, sleeping in my mom's car at one point. And so this is sort of what started my um, maybe obsession with housing, but maybe obsession is not the right word, but it really made me really concerned about our relationship with housing, and really thinking about how housing should just be available for everyone, even especially people who are going through hardships. So when my father got out of prison, was a few years later, my sister and I moved to Harlem with him. So we were originally living in Yonkers. I grew up in Yonkers, New York. And so we moved to Harlem with my dad, and he started kind of getting his life, back together and getting back on his feet. And we really stressed, education and things. And I knew that I wanted to leave New York because of all of the things we had been through. But I really loved my time in Harlem when I was, high school and things like that. But I knew when I went to college that I was going to go somewhere else because I wanted to just experience something different than what I experienced in New York. And I knew that going away for college would be helpful for that. And so I ended up going. So this is New York, that's where Harlem is. I ended up going to North Carolina for undergrad and majoring in political science and sociology. And originally I wanted to study law because I saw that kind of as a way to use my passion for inequality and things to kind of help people. But ultimately, when I took my first sociology class, my professor sort of opened up my brain to all of the language around inequality and sexism and racism and oppression and privilege. And I knew after I took that class, I was like, I want to be a professor because I want to open up the minds of young people the same way that my professor, her name was Dr. Cheryl Kleinman, the same way she opened up my mind. And so I knew after my time at UNC that I wanted to be a professor. So after UNC, I moved to DC to study, to continue my studies in sociology. And while I was there, I worked on several public health programs, or public health studies, I should say. And that's when I kind of I learned about the field of public health and realized, oh, I don't just have to stay in this realm of sociology. I can also study public health and sort of use my sociology background to frame the type of questions and things that I ask. Ultimately, my time at American was not the most positive, and I won't get into that. But after my time doing my master's program, I left academia for a while because I was just exhausted. And I started working at an HIV think tank in Los Angeles. And the think tank is called the Black AIDS Institute. And kind of like you heard in my bio, we did a lot of work around training and capacity building. So we would go to health departments across the country and basically try to help them, and community-based organizations, but mostly health departments, try to help them better engage Black people along the continuum of care. So they did a good job at testing, but there was really a drop-off with linking Black folks to the appropriate care mechanisms so that they can stay healthy on their HIV care regimens. And so while I was at the Black AIDS Institute, there was a couple of things that I sort of learned. One, that Los Angeles is one of the most beautiful places I have ever seen. But behind that beauty was a lot of disparity. So coming back to this idea of housing being so fundamental to where I live and what I constantly thought about, when we were doing our work in Los Angeles, you can't really talk about or think about HIV without thinking about homelessness, and sort of all of these other health issues too. homelessness in Los Angeles was so profound, and 40% of the unhoused people in Los Angeles are Black, even though Black people only make up 9% of the population. And so even though I was doing this work that was really focused on like biomedical interventions, so getting HIV positive people on medications and keeping them on their medications, it's hard to think about medications when you're unhoused, right? Or unstably housed. And so this was kind of kept bringing me back to this idea of like, I need to study things a little bit more removed from the biomedical side of public health and really start thinking about the more structural and social determinants of health and how I can kind of intervene on those. And so after that, I stayed at in Los Angeles and started pursuing a PhD in community health sciences to specifically study the relationship between racism, housing, and health. And so over the years, I have, done studies where I asked questions about, what is the relationship between housing discrimination and health? What are the causes and consequences of downward mobility for birthing persons? And then how can we use, theoretical frameworks like critical race theory to improve our analysis of racism and health? And so this kind of all led me to really wanting to focus my research on sort of the more radical approach to public health. So if you're familiar with kind of the history of public health has really radical roots. And when I say radical, I mean kind of going to the origin or the root of the problem. So, public health and urban planning kind of emerged as kind of one sort of discipline where we made changes in the urban environment. We made changes in unhealthy housing in order to reduce the likelihood of contracting diseases, right? And so over time, as urban planning and public health became professionalized, public health kind of started going into a more medicalized route and thinking about, more biomedical interventions and behavioral interventions and things like that, which are certainly important. But one of the things that I'm realizing is when you're looking at population distributions, when you're looking at why disparities exist across populations, thinking about biomedical and behavioral interventions are not enough, right? I think it's really important for us to kind of go back to the radical roots of public health and talk about these structural determinants. So my lab here, my research lab here at UChicago is called the Radical Health Justice Lab. And so I'll spend a little bit of time talking about some of the questions that I'm interested in asking. And then I'll kind of, open it up to questions. I really want to just kind of have a discussion with you all so that you can kind of learn a little bit more about me and kind of where I see the lab going in the future. So the first sort of area of work that I focus on is housing justice. And so I ask questions like, what is the relationship between gentrification and displacement and housing discrimination, urban development? How do those things impact the health of Black communities? And so you kind of heard a little bit about one of the projects that I'm launching that is focused on displacement on the South Side, and that project really comes out of an original grant that I got from the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation to study a neighborhood urban development intervention in Woodlawn. It's called the Choice Neighborhood Initiative, and so some of you might be familiar with that, and I'm happy to talk a little bit about that more. But one of the things that the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development is trying to do is, instead of just demolishing public housing like they did in the past, but really looking at making full neighborhood redevelopment initiatives. So adding things that people need. So community health centers, adding more affordable housing, adding grocery stores, and really developing entire neighborhoods to better improve community health and economic outcomes. And And so in theory, that sounds like a really great idea, but there's been very little evaluation on that. So I got some funding to do the evaluation for the Woodlawn project. And as I was working on this project, I realized that, you know, we should really be expanding the scope of the project and really looking at displacement on the South Side, because there's a lot of changes with the Obama Center and the university kind of expanding southward, that there's a lot of concerns from community members about displacement on the South Side, and not so much in-depth research about, you know, what are the kind of causes and consequences of displacement, and also what can we do to sort of intervene on displacement and keep people in their homes. So that's what that project is going to be about, and I'm happy to answer more questions if folks have questions around that. So the next area of my work is birth justice. So like I mentioned, have been interested in housing and health for a long time. And while I was working on my dissertation proposal, I became pregnant with my first daughter, and I had my own pregnancy complications. And so also something I'm happy to talk about if folks are interested. But that experience made me really want to understand more. So I didn't go to my PhD program wanting to necessarily study maternal and child health. But now that's sort of my area of expertise because of my own experience with pregnancy complications, and just wanting to make the connections or try to better understand the connection between racism and stress and housing and maternal and child health. So this is sort of the area that I am kind of an expert in now. Oops, now how did that happen? Okay, so yeah, so the questions that I ask in this area of birth justice is, you know, how can we use tools like guaranteed income and doula support to improve maternal health outcomes, particularly for Black women, but low-income women more generally, because we know that the US has the worst maternal outcomes among so-called developed countries. And then when like drilling down to subgroups, we all know that Black women have really high rates of maternal morbidity, mortality. Our rates of infant mortality are higher than other groups. And so one of the areas that I want to kind of really focus on here is how can we support pregnant women to improve those outcomes down the line. And then finally, the area of epistemic injustice or epistemic justice, is I'm really interested in asking, you know, how can we reimagine public health research so that the voices of the most marginalized people are actually centered and included in the work that we're doing. So one of the things that is not just unique to public health, but I think academic research in general, is that there is this sort of, you know, top-down approach to the research, and there is sort of this deficit approach to the research. And so I'm interested in kind of using my time and my resources to really think about creatively, how can we include or be led by community members who are experiencing these adverse outcomes for across a bunch of different outcomes, but really thinking about centering those voices from community to improve the way that we do public health. So this is my team. We are small but mighty. I have two undergrads working with me, Juliana and Aaliyah. And then I have two graduate students, Andrew, who I think is on the call now, and then Carson, who I don't know if she's on, but they're my graduate students. And yeah, so we are working on several projects together, and I will end it there. So we have about 30 or so minutes for questions, which I am happy to talk more about. Anything that I talked about here, and go into more depth about some of the research that I am either thinking about or have done in the past. So I'll stop there and yeah, open up to questions.
Like we have a question in the chat.
Yeah.
I see Deja.
hmm
Hi there.
Hi, thank you for your talk. I grew up in Chicago in the Inglewood area, so I'm
Mhm.
more curious about your findings with displacement in housing in Chicago and where we are currently with that. Because we don't have rent control out here, and a lot of real estate companies have come into Chicago and
Mhm.
have taken over, and but there's also I'm seeing like random condominiums being placed in Inglewood and different locations, and so I'm not familiar with what's currently is happening with housing in Chicago, especially with the Black community.
Mhm. Well, I will let you know as soon as I have some findings.
Okay.
Yeah, so we're in the beginning of the study. So I'm still waiting for IRB approval to get started. But the idea is that we will have kind of three phases. So the first phase is kind of what I already talked about, is like doing a more just a focused evaluation of the community of the Choice Neighborhood Initiative
hmm
that happened in Woodlawn. And then the second phase is a qualitative study where it will be looking, probably trying to talk to about 50 Southside, 50 Black Southsiders to get an in-depth look at their experiences with displacement. And then using that data from the in-depth interviews to develop a large-scale survey for the South Side to do exactly what you're saying, is trying to understand, where are the hot pockets of these condos popping up? Where are people kind of more likely to experience displacement, and sort of what are the consequences of displacement? And I think the goal ultimately is to use that data to then inform policymakers to say, like, these are the challenges and issues that Black folks are experiencing on the South Side. Maybe we can use that to, inform future policies around rent control, around, more support for supportive housing and other housing models that are not kind of speculative, right? So I'm still very much
So you're at the very
learning.
beginning of
Yes,
everything.
very, very, very beginning.
Okay.
Yeah, but I'm very much interested in still learning. So I'm still very new to Chicago, so I'm
hmm
super open and happy to learn from native Chicagoans about, like, what questions yeah,
Yeah.
exactly, what questions I should be asking, what community organizations we should be talking to, things of that nature. So, like, we're at the very beginning, so I think this is the point where we're trying to incorporate as many community voices as possible, and particularly people who are from Chicago.
Okay. Thank you, and welcome to Chicago.
Thank you. Were there any questions in the chat?
Yeah,
Ooh, I see a couple of good ones. Okay, so Ricky asks, what does radical public health look like in this new political, economic, and social landscape? That is a fantastic question. Um, we will see. I think for me, I think there's so many different approaches that different people are taking, right? So I'll just be very candid and say, the funding landscape for doing public health research right now is in shambles. There are a lot of people who are getting their grants terminated. If there are certain buzzwords in their grants, and equity, justice, climate, racism, all of those things are kind of on those lists, and those are all of the words that you heard me talk about in my presentation. And so yeah, it's really unclear right now what the best strategy is to move forward to even to fund this work. There are some foundations that are interested in really doubling down and supporting this type of work that I'm interested in doing. And so I'm hoping that I can continue to get foundation support. But I'm kind of resolute, and maybe it's my stubbornness. I'm a New Yorker, and we tend to be very stubborn, but I don't plan on changing course in terms of the work that I do. I think I just plan on being more strategic in how it gets funded. But I plan on kind of continuing to do my radical public health work and focusing on the root causes of health inequalities, because ultimately, if this administration is 4 years, that's a very small time frame in the grand scheme of things, and I don't want to lose my focus on the people that I care most about and the communities that I care most about. So I am not naive to think that it's going to be easy, but that is sort of the approach that I've decided to take, is to just really just try to be more creative with the funding piece, and still do the work that I spent many, 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 many years in school to do. I see some other questions. Okay. So how do you approach power sharing with community collaborators when designing interventions or conducting research? Another good question, Ricky. You were like firing off with the good questions. So that's a great question. So I can speak to an example that is another study that I'm hoping to launch in the next few months, pending funding. And it is a guaranteed income pilot for pregnant women. So the idea here is to co-design with community members a guaranteed income program for pregnant women, and then pilot the program so that in the future we can kind of scale it up. But in terms of power sharing, that's exactly the kind of model that we want to do. So the idea is that there is a kind of community advisory board that'll consist of Black women, Black mothers, birth workers, OBGYNs, and other healthcare workers who are kind of involved in the birthing and parenting process. And we will kind of convene together and we will co-develop this intervention. So thinking about all of the different components that go into an intervention, how much money the moms will get, how often will they get it? Will they get it until baby turns 1? Will they get it till the baby's 6 months? What are some of the other wraparound services that we can help integrate into the intervention? So some women might be interested in parenting classes. Some women might be interested in, financial support. Some women might be interested in, free or low cost childcare, right? So what are some of the other components to an intervention that can go along with the cash that will help pregnant women in their kind of pregnancy and then in the beginning of their, parenting journey? So I imagine that program, that pilot, to be 100% co-designed with community members who would be the, prime kind of beneficiaries of the program. Let's see, other questions. Ooh, how do you prepare students to think radically in public health, especially in institutions that might be more conservative or risk averse? Ooh, that's good. I mean, I think there are so many people, the types of, I guess, the types of classes that I take, the types of classes that I teach tend to attract people who are more, I will say, who are less conservative. And so I don't know that, so they're more open to this idea of thinking about public health radically. So I think there's sort of a selection bias there. I'm not typically teaching very conservative students and trying to change their mind. But I will say that one of the main things that I try to approach in my teaching is to help students think about things differently. So oftentimes when students enter public health, they think about it from the framework of just the medicalized version of public health. And so and a lot of public health students are interested in going into medicine, right? They kind of see public health as a transition into medicine, especially at the undergraduate level. And so my approach is to really think about making sure that we're teaching them about all of the social and structural factors that go into health, and that only about, 10 or 15% of our health is related to our biology, when there's all of these other factors that actually shape us as individuals, how our health kind of manifests, but also when we look at populations and communities, right? We look at the differences between populations and communities. All of those things are shaped by social and structural factors. So I think there's a lot of reading in my classes, and a lot of discussion in my classes, and there's a lot of arguing sometimes, but I think the ultimate goal is to shift the way that we think about health, not just purely as a biological, truth or biological fact, but that there's all of these social and structural things that go into how our health looks. Camille?
Hi.
Hi there.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for your talk today. So I work in health equity philanthropy at Rush University Medical Center. And just listening to you talk, I have so many questions, but I know I can only ask one.
That's
Have
as
you,
many as you want.
oh yeah, well, seeing as you're in Chicago now, have you looked at the impact of the reparations work that had been happening in Evanston, and if that's having any impact on health disparities and the social determinants of health for the residents there that were able to receive those monies? Does that seem like that's a model that could be replicated in other neighborhoods in Chicago? Or I haven't heard too much about it, but I'm curious to see what you think about that from a policy perspective.
I have not looked at it, but that's a fantastic idea. So I will write that down. But I think so. There's a couple things that makes me think of. The one is the relationship between guaranteed income and reparations, right? And I think there's a lot of people that kind of use them interchangeably, but they're really not. So I think, at least from my perspective, and I know I have colleagues who are much more deep into the reparations work than I have been. However, but my understanding about reparations, I mean, I don't know how it's kind of worked in Evanston, but that there is like a cultural shift, right? Because the point is to kind of repair something that has happened in the past. And in order to repair something that's happened in the past, you have to acknowledge it, it has to take accountability, and then something has to change moving forward. So it can't just be this monetary value. There also has to be this kind of like cultural, social change that is also going forward, so that the harms of the past don't continue to replicate and repeat themselves. And I think that part is often missing from, that part, I should say, is not really included in like the guaranteed income kind of model. And I'm not sure if it's really included in the Evanston model. I don't know much about it, but I do think that if there is sort of an evaluation of what have been the benefits or the impact of reparations, it has to include this sort of, cultural social shift, as well as the impact of, whatever the kind of like monetary value that comes along with it. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. And can I ask a follow-up question really quick?
Sure, yeah.
Given what you just said, I'm not sure if you've read that book called The Sum of Us by Heather McGhee.
I have not, but I know
Okay.
I'm familiar with it though.
Well, in the book, she talks about, the lowest common denominator of, sort of this justice thinking when it comes to repairing the harms that have been done to like the Black community. The big example is like, oh, we have a community pool, but we don't want Black people in the pool, so we're going to drain the pool and then no one can use it. So kind of like the collective benefit of something from a social standpoint. So the only issue I have with her premise is that the support that like Black people get, or in this sort of reparative sense, it can only go to the extent of the imagination in maybe the power majority, like white population, of it has to benefit us as well. That's the only way we're going to get a benefit. So in Evanston, I'm sure there's some sort of benefit happening to the whole community, right? For Black people receiving whatever the monies that they're getting to be reinvested in the community. And that's kind of an issue that I run into a lot in working with like foundations at our institution, that they're helping the Black community only to the extent that it will help white wealthy people that maybe don't even live in the community but live in Chicago. So I don't know your thoughts about that, like the benefit, what do we do with a benefit that doesn't necessarily, it's not impacting everyone equally, but it's impacting the most marginalized or put upon group in that structure, and what does that mean for funding when it comes to, like, maybe that's not going to help you as much, but it's going to help us, and that's still, there's sort of still justice within that idea.
Yeah, I mean, I think so. The term I think you're referring to is called interest convergence, and so it's something that was kind of really theorized. At least my first exposure to it is by from Derek Bell, who's the kind of like the father of critical race theory, and he has a great paper that's on Brown v. Board of Education, basically analyzing how the Supreme Court ruling in Brown v. Board of Education is an example of interest convergence, like this idea that we only desegregated schools because of the political climate in which we were in at the time, where we were in the Cold War, and we couldn't present ourselves at the United States, when I say we, as this sort of freedom-loving country when we had segregation, and when we had legalized segregation. And so basically we desegregated schools because that helped our image on the global scale around, this idea of like being freedom loving, et cetera, et cetera. So to your question, what do I think about that? I mean, I think it is a valid concern. I think if you were to, Derek Bell has, passed for a long time, but I think in 2013, but if you were to ask him, he would say every example of racial progress has been an example of interest convergence. Like, there has been no progress for Black people in the United States that has not also benefited white people in some way. So, I mean, there's a couple of ways that we can think about that. We can think about that, okay, how do we take things that will primarily benefit Black people and frame them in a way that can also benefit white people, so that we can get the things done that we need to get done. Or we can just push back and say, it doesn't matter if it impacts white people at all. If it needs to get done, it needs to get done. I think there's different strategies that people can take. But I think the evidence shows that when you frame it from the standpoint of the benefit of white people, we are more successful. Great question. Definitely food for thought. Yeah, I highly recommend reading that Brown v. Board of Education paper from Derek Bell, because it's really, really eye-opening. Because I think sometimes things happen and we're like, progress, equality, and I think Brown v. Board is one of the things that we constantly look towards as a symbol of, like, America is getting better. And I think his analysis is really on point in terms of maybe not.
Rebekah, thank you for your talk. You got 3 people plus wanting a question in the chat.
Okay.
Would love to hear about your maternal health experience and how it shifted your research.
Yeah. So when I was pregnant with my first daughter, this was 2019. I, studying public health, you do all the things right? I did the prenatal yoga, and I did the genetic testing, and then I did the, had a doula, and did all the things, right? I was walking every day, I was eating well, and, all the things. And then I was teaching a course that year or that quarter, so the winter quarter at UCLA. And then one day I just woke up and just had these, I was probably, I think, like 25 weeks pregnant at that point, and woke up and had these extreme cramps. Like I was like bent over in my bed because it was so painful. And I was like, I don't know what is going on. And I was like, maybe I'm dehydrated or something. So I drink water, try to walk it off. And then I was like, okay, this is not normal. So after about 3-4 hours, I told my husband, like, we need to go to the hospital. So I get to the hospital and I'm like, hey, I'm having these cramps. I don't know what's going on. Can y'all help me? Just tell me what to do. And the lady at the counter, she was like, okay, well, how many weeks are you? And I was like, 25 weeks. And she was like, okay, yeah, we'll just send you up to labor and delivery. And I was like, wait, whoa. Like, why would you send me up to labor and delivery? Like, I'm definitely not going into labor. And she was like, well, we never know. And so it was at that moment where it had never even like occurred to me that this could be like a premature, like a preterm birth. And so we go into labor and delivery, and like I'm hooked up to all of these, cords and wires and tubes and things. And, ultimately, I did not give birth that day. I was given a bunch of fluids, and I was just extremely dehydrated. And my doctor was like, yeah, this was kind of a stress-induced dehydration. And so the next, couple of months, I was very, very adamant about not being stressed and, whatever. But ultimately, like, I was so entrenched in like the racism research, kind of how racism impacts health. And I think that some of that kind of just got into my body, right? And so during that time, I was like, I really want to better understand what just happened to me. I really want to better understand how this kind of similar situation happens to other Black women who are having babies. And so I completely kind of shifted gears when I was working on my dissertation proposal. I was like, I have to study maternal health. And I'm like, ended up taking more courses and things like that to make sure I knew what I was talking about. But it ended up being something that was helpful for me because it gave me just a really strong sense of purpose to really want to study something that I had a huge stake in, and that was also just really important to and for Black women across the United States. And so that's how it shaped the work. Ultimately, I was kind of like health outcome agnostic when I got into grad school. And then when I had that happen, I realized like this is something that I can't ignore moving forward. And so that's how it kind of shaped the work that I do. So are there any best practices from your time at the Black AIDS Institute that you feel might help advance health equity on the South Side? Ooh, that's a good question. So like I mentioned, I was working at the Black AIDS Institute, and one of the things that we were really that we spent a lot of time doing was we would talk to people who were either HIV positive or who were at a higher risk of contracting HIV. So we would do like focus groups from around the country. So we would talk to Black trans women. We would talk to young Black gay men about their experiences with kind of navigating health systems. And one of the things that we found sort of when we reported this information back to the organizations that we were contracted to do the work for, was that there was a lot of internal organizational policies that made it hard for Black people to engage in their healthcare programs. So like when you think about hours of operation at various organizations that are serving Black people that just don't work for low income people's schedule, right? So like hours of operation, punitive experiences when folks are late or when folks have their kids in the organization. And so there was a lot of different things that you don't necessarily think are racist, but they are having the same impact as basically excluding a whole swath of people from their services. So I think, you know, for organizations that are trying to serve a particular population, I think before making standard policies for how your organization is going to run, I think it might be helpful to talk to community members who you want to serve and figure out what actually works best for them and shape your policies around the community that you want to serve. So it might be having, you know, 1 or 2 days a week where you have off hours operations, or you don't have late penalty policies, or, you know, whatever the case may be. But I think tailoring organizational policies around the needs of actual people versus, you know, hoping that people tailor their lives around the needs of your organization. I think that's one of the main takeaways that from the institute that I try to take forward. Hi, Tala.
Hi, Rebecca. Thank you for your talk. I had a question on what if you've seen some optimal models of maternal health in the US from any of your research.
I have not personally seen them for my research, but anecdotally I have heard, right? So I think one of the things that I'm interested in looking at further is the use of birthing centers. So I do know a lot of folks who have birthed at birthing centers or outside of the hospital system, or who have had home births with a midwife and a doula. And it seems like I mean, the numbers are so small in terms of relative to like people who have birth, who give birth in hospitals. So it's hard to do like a direct comparison. But it seems like there are fewer, just fewer complications. And this is for, you know, non-high risk pregnancies, right? So like there's a lot of different caveats with that. So I do think that that is something to continue to look into, is outside of the hospital setting, right? Because we know that there's a lot of issues with Black women not being paid attention to in hospital settings, Black women's pain not being taken seriously in hospital settings, right? And so if we can kind of demedicalize childbirth for the circumstances in which medical interventions are not necessary, there might be something there in terms of reducing the maternal morbidity and mortality from there. You said within the US, but there are models in other places that I also want to kind of look more into. So I just had a conversation, a meeting yesterday with a colleague of mine who does a lot of maternal and child health work in Cuba. And you know, Cuba's health system is just so much more robust than ours. And so I really want to just learn more about, they have like a maternity home model where there's like maternity homes in every community. And so people don't have to travel very far for maternity care. They're basically given mental health support and physical health support throughout the pregnancy and into postpartum period. So there's just so much more care and attention to the pregnancy kind of process and the birthing process there in Cuba that I want to learn more about. Yeah, I don't know that we can kind of learn from Cuba and then like plop those examples here in the States, but I do think that they can kind of inform how we think about, if we, you know, when we do have a birthing center on the South Side, which is coming soon, I think, how we can kind of use these models from other places to better support Black moms. Other questions?
I have a more general question just about what your experience has been like at University of Chicago. First of all, I'll admit to my ignorance, I didn't even realize we had a public health program at the university. So just wondering how you've been able to connect with folks in other parts of the university, probably more likely with people in the BSD, but connections with folks, in the humanities, social sciences, public policy. Have you been able to make those kinds of connections? I know you're affiliated with the Center for the Study of Race, Politics, and Culture, which is awesome, and introducing us to a whole new part of the university that we don't really have much entree to, but just, kind of your experiences here as compared to maybe like a UCLA or some other places that you've been, in terms of like the multidisciplinary work and opportunities that you find.
So, yeah, so good question. I think, yeah, our department is small. We are located within the BSD, and there's a handful of us. I think I saw Marsha on the call. So there's a handful of us who do more, hey Marsha, who do more kind of socially oriented work. And I think in the BSD, we are kind of like the social sciences department within the BSD. I think that's kind of how we're considered. But to your point about making connections, so yeah, coming from two large state universities that had big schools of public health, the opportunities for collaboration at those places were just so much easier, right? Because the people who are studying the thing that you're studying are like right across the hall versus at a different part of the university in a different division with different funding priorities and strategies and things. And so I think, but I knew that coming in that this would be different. And so I think a lot of folks really warned me, like, Chicago is very entrepreneurial, nobody's gonna handhold you, you gotta really put yourself out there and take the initiative to meet people. And so that's what I've been doing. I've been going to like events at Crown. I've been meeting people I'm a part of a early career success program that's university wide. And so I've been meeting a lot of different people from across the university in that program and making connections there. So it has been easier to connect with people in the BSD who are also doing maternal health research, but there's actually quite a bit of people who are aligned with my work in Crown as well, and in sociology, and not so much in Harris, though I have met with a couple of people in Harris. But yeah, so I think just trying to like send a lot of cold emails, and folks fortunately have just been very responsive and very generous with their time here.
That's good to hear because we often get very siloed here. Nobody knows what anybody else is doing and they don't know when they have shared interests. So the other thing I wanted to just go back to your work, the upcoming work on determinants of health and housing, and wondering if you've been able to connect with the folks who are working for the community benefits agreement for the Obama Library. I know there's been a lot of activity recently, some town hall meetings happened last weekend and maybe this weekend. It seems like things are revving up again. So if you're not connected to those folks, I'm happy to share some emails and stuff.
Yes, I'm definitely connected to the folks at Southside Together. About 3 weeks ago, I went to one of the CBA meetings on the South Shore, but then there's also the group in Woodlawn. And so, yeah, I'm connected with them and just working to see how I can kind of be of support. And they're doing a lot of great work.
I do have a question. I am curious. Have you done a lot of research on PCOS?
I have not.
Okay, just curious about that.
Yeah, say more.
Well, I know at least three Black women that have suffered with PCOS.
and only one who successfully changed her diet, exercise. She just changed her habits.
Mm-hmm.
And she was able to successfully have a child, well, two actually, without
Mm-hmm.
IVF or anything like that. So I was just wondering, is it more so a condition that happens to Black women more so versus white women or
Mm-hmm.
any other race?
Yeah, I'm not sure about that. I do know like anecdotally several friends that who are also experienced PCOS and have successfully had children without like a fertility intervention. But yeah, I don't know enough about it to speak to that. But I do
Okay,
think it's something important to
okay,
think about. Yeah.
okay. Got it. Thank you.
Did we get all the questions from the chat?
Okay. Well, thank you, Professor Cross, for your talk today. We're truly grateful, and
Oh,
we are recording this. So if you guys want to watch it back later. It'll be on our YouTube channel. Other than that, everybody have a great day, and thank you.
thank y'all. Take care.